Since right now I have all of my single shadows split by brands that I purchased them from, and I have my depotted shadows separate, I thought it'd be fun to kind of look through my depotted shadows, pick out the ones that stand out to me the most, and just swatch them and tell you about where they're from and why I like them so much. So if that sounds interesting to you, then go ahead and just keep on watching and subscribe. I tried to kind of censor myself and keep the amount of shadows that I have in this video shorter. It was hard though, because there are a lot of really beautiful shadows that I've depotted. I went ahead and split them up by brand so that way we can go through and see how many from each brand really impressed me. And I also split them up by how shimmery versus sparkly they are. So the ones in this palette are more sparkly, whereas the ones over here are just more of a sheen or satin type of finish. We'll go ahead and start with the shimmery shades. And this first one comes from the Sashimi City palette, and it is so pretty. I definitely do have dupes of this shade in my single shadows, but I have to say, for depotting this from a palette, I am so impressed by the quality of this shade in comparison to my single shadows, which tend to be a little bit more expensive and a little bit higher quality. I feel like I'm still getting that same quality in this shadow. I don't necessarily feel that way about the other shade in that palette though, which is why I only included this one. This is such an old shade. This is from the Desi and Katie Friendcation palette. So just to paint a picture, that's pretty far back in makeup history, it feels like. This is such a pretty shade though. All of the shadows, or all of these shimmers in that palette, were this kind of really sheer, sparkly formula, and they were all really pretty, but this one in particular, I love, even still to this day, years later, because it is so sparkly, and I like that it's close to my skin tone because I can put it on and it's really impactful, but also somehow still subtle because of the color of it. Next to that, this is my only Pat McGrath Astral shade. This is from that Bridgerton 2 palette, and it is sparkly. It's just a very sparkly rose gold shade. And though it was a pain in the butt to depot, I am so happy I did because I use it all the time as a single shadow now. If you want to hear more about that story, I'll link the video where I talk about the depotting process for this palette down below. These next two are little baby pans. They are even smaller than the ColourPop little mini pans. They're pretty small and adorable. These are from the Odin's Eye Alva palette, the original neutral one. I really enjoyed the shimmers in that palette. Some of them were pretty dang similar, and you can see they have gotten hard pan, but the sparkle in these shades is beautiful. They are so sparkly IRL. I feel like it's just all little micro sparkles in various colors in each of these shades, and they're so dimensional. I really enjoyed this formula, and I would love to try another palette from them in the future, but nothing has spoken to me yet, so I will just enjoy the little tiny baby pans that I have for now. The next three are all depotted from the Glaminatrix Nearly Natural palette. I really enjoyed the shimmer formula in that palette. The one on my ring finger, which I'll swatch for you now, and the one on my index finger, both of those are the sparkliest of the shadows in that palette. Not all of them have the same formula, I will say, and so these are the three that stand out to me the most. These two because of the really beautiful textured shimmery like formula, and then this one because of the really unique color. It's a little purple, a little silver, a little taupe. It's just really unique. Down here we have two shades from the Glam Light Chocolate Martini palette that I got for Christmas last year. I picked these. One, the sparkle in them is really beautiful, but two, they are really duochrome, which I feel like is harder to find in palettes than it is in single shadows. And so these impress me for that reason. Not only are they duochrome, but they're really good duochromes. And because of that, they've got a special place in my heart. These two are both from the It's Belle Break the Rules palette. Such a pretty palette, but these two shades in particular really stand out to me. I know that these are private labeled shadows that It's Belle has just kind of put together in a palette, but I don't even care. They're so pretty. Oh my gosh. This one goes from like that, it has that peachy coral kind of base with that green shimmer, but the shimmer does turn pink depending on the angle. This one is less dimensional, you know, in the shiftiness of it, but the sparkle and that neutral kind of rosy shade is beautiful. Honestly, I feel like I could have put every shade from this palette in, you know, my top shimmers, but this in particular is the golden shade from the Flower Beauty Desert Lights palette. It is like melted metallic kind of shininess. I really enjoy that formula, and it holds up really well against some of my indie shadows. We'll do these next two, and then we'll reset and start swatching my arm fresh. This shade is from the Nabla Cuties Platinum palette. It is so sparkly. Oh my gosh, do you see all of that sparkle in it? It's a really deep kind of slate gray color. The way that I like to wear this on the eyes is I like to sheer it out a little bit more, so that way it's a little less intimidating and just gives me some depth to the eyes. But even as you sheer it out, all of those sparkles stay, and it's a gorgeous shade. Next to that is the shade, oh, I couldn't tell you what it's called, but it's from the Beauty Bay Age of Opulence palette. It's a pink gold duochrome, super sparkly, a little bit sheer at first, but if you layer it up, it does get there. And the duochrome in it is really strong, and I love that sparkle. I did really enjoy the shimmer formula from Beauty Bay. First round of shimmer shadows again, just so that way you can appreciate all the beautiful sparkles before we move on. I'm back with a clean arm, so let's go ahead and do this next round of shadows. This first one comes from the Simply Posh Fairy Tale Fairies palette. I really like the shimmers in that palette, although they definitely aren't all the same. Out of all of them, I feel like this is the best quality. It's got an opaque base, but there's still something light about it. And then that shimmer, that golden shift is gorgeous. I mean, look how strong of a shift that is. It really is a stunning shade. And even with my indie shadows, I don't have anything quite color-wise like this shade. The next two are from the Blend Buddy Surge palette. And that palette didn't have a ton of shimmers in it. And the ones that it did have, some of them were beautiful, like these two that I'm showing you, but some of them were really not good. These two, though, have such punchy, bright color to them. There's a ton of individual sparkle you can see. This top one is cool because it's kind of a gold, but also kind of a pink at the same time. Really stunning. And this one is such a bright, you know, kind of deep gold color. I remember when I first swatched these, when I got that palette, I was so impressed by them, and I have continued to remain impressed by them since I've had them. The next two are from an LA Girl palette that I had. I don't remember what it was called, but it was one of their 9-pan palettes, and I was really impressed by the quality of the shimmers in that palette. These two in particular just have a lot of sparkle and shine to them, and the second one, it reminds me of a shade in a Natasha Denona palette, the Mini Retro. That really light colored, multi-colored sparkle shadow in there is very similar to this. Gorgeous. For, you know, $9 for two of these shadows to be in my top shimmer shadows is saying something. And then the last four that I've got in this first palette all come from the Sugar Drizzle Sugar Dreams palette. This first one is a multi-chrome, which is awesome to have in a palette, and it's such a pretty multi-chrome, you know, it's kind of got a little bit less saturated of a color, which makes it easier to wear day to day, but it still is definitely a multi-chrome, which is so cool. This next one is an icy baby pink with a silver shift and shimmer in there. Really, really stunning. And these ones in the Sugar Drizzle palette were just so sparkly, and I feel like that's part of why I really, really enjoy them and think of them as some of my favorites. This one is a similar shift, but the base on it is a light lavender compared to that light pink, but they both have that really strong silver sparkle in them. I think that the Sugar Drizzle ones might be private labeled as well, but I haven't seen such similar shades as these from other private labeled palettes, whereas I guess this one in the It's Belle palette is the one that has a pretty similar dupe. I'll link that video down below if you're curious. And then the last shade from the Sugar Drizzle Polish palette, it's this vibrant lime green, maybe a little less sparkly than the other three, but such a bright, punchy color. I really enjoy that one, and I feel like I use it a lot just because it's so unique. Go ahead, give you a little bit of moving footage of these ones, and then we'll move on to the less sparkly, more just regular satin or shimmer shades. We'll go ahead and do some of these less sparkly shades now. This first one comes from the Classic Paradise palette from Ace Beauté, a really pretty kind of minky brown taupe kind of shade. You can see there's something cool about it, but something warm about it as well. And this is a great everyday, all over the lid, one and done type of shade to me. The next one is actually a really similar type of shade. This is from Zoeva, the Spice of Life palette. This one is a little less deep and dimensional than that one from Ace Beauté, but there is something definitely very similar about these two shadows. I think that as I was picking out shadows for this little experiment, I definitely learned that this is my favorite type of shade to wear every day, and these are the ones that stick out in my mind when I think of my depotted shadows. This one is from the Viseart Cashmere Entiendo, or however you say it, that palette from last year. This one, something again kind of similar, but we're leaning into a little bit more pinky purple and a little bit less of that brown. Next to that, we have two from ABH. This first one is from the Soft Glam palette. Again, pretty similar, a little bit lighter, a little bit more silver, but a beautiful everyday shade. This one is from the Subculture palette, and it is a vibrant kind of electric neon lime green shade with something a little bit red in the base, not quite as duochrome as my indie shadows, but if you've been here before, you know I like this one. I say it a lot. It really does hold up even all these years later. Now we're getting into some BH shades. This first one, I couldn't tell you what palette it's from, but it's a really pretty duochrome. It's a little bit more of a cool toned green and a little bit less punchy than that one from ABH, but it has that pink base to it that you can see, and it's a really pretty duochrome. Much more subtle than my indie ones, but it is a gorgeous one, and I do find myself looking for this one when I do want something a little bit more subtle. Now we've got another duochrome, and I'm pretty sure these last two, we'll go ahead and swatch this too. These are both from the Hawaii palette, I think. This one is a red to orange duochrome, and texture-wise, it's much more of like a satin, and it needs to be built up a little bit, but it does have a strong duochrome shift. I'm not sure how well I'm going to be able to show it to you on camera, but it is there. You can see that pink, and then it does go orangey in the base color. Really, really pretty, and so unique for a shade that I've gotten from a palette. Then I also have just this kind of champagne gold leaning shade. I love this. It's my favorite inner corner and brow bone highlight shade. It matches my skin tone really well, and it's such a beautiful shine that works well with cool and warm tone shades. These last two down here are both from the Natasha Denona Midi Glam palette. Really pretty shades. She has some more satiny shimmer shades in there, but then she has a few of these shades with much more definitive like sparkle pieces in them, and those are the ones that I really like. Both of those type of that formula and that palette stick out to me. I tend to enjoy shades from indie brands that I've just happened to depot, which kind of helps reinforce the fact that indie is where it's at when it comes to eyeshadows, at least for me personally. I hope that this video was fun for you to watch. I know I love seeing sparkly, beautiful shadows swatched out, and I also hope that this inspires you to go pull out any of your eyeshadows and figure out which ones are your favorite. Whatever you learn, let us know down in the comments below and let's have a conversation about it. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and until I see you next time, I hope that you stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy. Bye!